Welcome to Hill Talks Podcast, the podcast when you listen in, you'll know you're not alone. I'm your host, Hillary Baggett, and I'm glad you're here. Today, I'm really excited and a little bit nervous, I'll be honest, to welcome Leah Petrucci. And you'll find out why I'm a little bit nervous. She is a gifted licensed mental health counselor. She's a specialist in narcissistic recovery. I can barely say that word, so that's always funny. And most recently, she has really turned all of this into a holistic health and wellness coach practice. She's a total package, and so I get a little goosebumps, a little bit nervous because Leah is amazing. And today we're going to be talking about how do you recover from a narcissistic relationship, some of the skills and tools. What's really interesting is how she even got into this field. And that's what drew me to her. So I hope you will enjoy. Help me welcome Leah Petrucci.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me, Hillary.
I'm
Very
so
excited.
glad you're here. Well, let's just dive right in because today's conversation is a little bit of how you help other people get out of unhealthy relationships while you're mastering midlife. We're going to talk about the biggest lesson maybe that you've learned in this process and how you have pivoted your career, which ties you all back into your big why. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. So tell me about the weaving of your story into your purpose and your work.
Yeah. Well, when I started the journey of becoming a therapist, or actually, I didn't even know that I was going to start that journey to become a therapist when I went to school to get my bachelor's degree in psychology. I thought I was going to do the 4-year degree and that's it. But when I realized that I wanted to do more than social work and case management and paperwork, um, went back to school to get my master's degree in clinical mental health counseling. And at the time, I had my mind set on doing substance abuse work, being that was going to be my niche, was working with substance abuse clients and also, as an intern, you take on all the clients that you can get because you want to experience everything, and you also want to find out what is going to be your niche. And even though I had my mind and my heart set on doing substance abuse, I also had experience with working with couples and working with families and working with minors. And it's interesting now that I'm in private practice, I don't work with any of those that I started that I started with, you know. And the more I started to intern with substance abuse clients, I saw how painful it was to watch clients relapse time and time again and go back to their drug of choice. And it was just really hard, and it was really painful. And when I also was working with couples, that was painful also to watch, especially when I was dealing mostly with couples who were very toxic, and at the time I was still in my internship, so I didn't quite know yet what narcissism really encompassed. But I was looking back, I got a lot of clients with narcissistic. One of the partners was narcissistic, and usually they came to therapy because there had been an affair, or they were they were ready to divorce. And the narcissistic partner, typically they were males. I mean, narcissistic people can also be females, but typically these were males that were presenting for couples therapy. And they weren't acknowledging their part. They were coming to therapy saying, fix my wife, or fix my child, rather than I'm having trouble, help me to be different. And I just got really burned out really quickly from working with these couples. And it wasn't until I was almost towards the end of my internship and I was working with a client, and she was in a very a relationship with a very controlling man, very possessive, very controlling man. And I knew enough about narcissism. And mind you, we really didn't learn enough about narcissism in my grad program. We just didn't. It wasn't enough of the curriculum. But I knew enough about it to identify this is narcissism, or at least it sounded like it. And started working with her and tried to, convince her to leave, and she just wasn't there yet. And during this time working with her, I started to realize that I was in an unhealthy relationship of my own at the same time as I'm working with this client.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Wow.
Right. Wow. Exactly. And let's see, I had moved in with this person very quickly. I wasn't really ready to move in, but that's also something that happens with narcissistic people, is they're very convincing and they paint this picture of the future, and they make it sound so wonderful and great, and they're very charming in the beginning, and I fell for that, and we moved in together way too quickly. It was only maybe 4 months, and we moved in, and right away that honeymoon period, which I later knew to be love bombing, which is an extreme form of narcissism, when they just really shower you with gifts and compliments and praise and like I said, promises of the future, and when all of that went away, we had barely even finished unpacking and moving our stuff in. He changed to a completely different person. And I started to just kind of wonder, oh gosh, what have I done? What have I done? And all this is happening while I'm working with this client. And I started to realize the similarities in my relationship with hers. He started to become very jealous and controlling, and tried to work things out. And we even did try to go to couples counseling, and it just didn't work out. And so I broke off the relationship and moved out. And of course he had another partner, and within a matter of days. So, true to narcissistic MO, that's typically what happens, is they have to be with somebody. So, he moved on very quickly. And I was very devastated. And I realized at that point that I needed to really take some time off from my internship and heal myself, and also to understand what had just happened, and to study more about what narcissism was, since we didn't get enough of that in my grad program. So I really did. I really studied everything I could get my hands on as far as material that's out there today: books, podcasts, virtual summits, just everything.
Yeah.
And I learned about narcissism, and I started working with mostly women. I also do work with men in my practice that are recovering from a narcissistic relationship, but mostly I do work with women. And so I changed my niche. I took 6 months off from that internship to heal. And when I came back, I was much more equipped, and decided to start helping women either get out of a narcissistic relationship or recover from the aftermath, recover from breakups. And that's actually mostly the work that I do today. I realized also over time that it was very painful, like it was in the beginning when I worked in substance abuse. Watching the client go back to their drug of choice over and over was very hard for me. And when I was working with women who were dealing with codependency, and watching them go back to their drug of choice, so to speak, the man that was very toxic.
Absolutely.
Like a drug to them, and I decided to change my niche a little bit and work with women who had decided that they were done, that they no longer wanted that, and that they didn't want to go back.
Okay.
And, so that's kind of bringing it to today.
That is amazing. And just for clarity, I wanted to talk just a little bit about kind of defining it. When I think of narcissism in kind of my layperson, since I'm not a specialist in that. I just think of somebody who's really full of themselves and just loves themselves. But
Yeah.
it sounds like there's some telltale signs of how to
Yeah.
know if you're with a narcissist. Can you tell me about that?
Yes, absolutely. And I can talk about it in early dating, and then also talk about it once they have been together with the partner for quite a while, because it can look very different. How,
Okay.
you know, how a narcissist presents him or herself in early dating is extremely different than how they present themselves when they've been in the relationship for a little while. Um,
Okay.
how
Are
they
there like,
attract,
sorry, are
yeah,
there
no,
3 to 5 kind of characteristics that are the primary in the early dating stage?
I've actually come up with 10, and I do
Okay.
have a relationship red flags checklist that I would
Ooh.
be that would be great to add in the show notes for anyone who wants to access that. It's a free checklist. And along with that, you get on my email list and you'll get free content about narcissism.
Sign me
Um,
up.
yeah, right. It's always good to know, because we are unfortunately in our time surrounded by narcissistic people at work, at the grocery store, in our families, in our relationships, in our friendships. And so it is good to know how to spot a narcissistic person. In early dating, just to give you a few, there are 10, but just to give you a couple, the love bombing in the beginning of a relationship, it's like a honeymoon phase times 100. They really are overshowering the person with things like gifts, compliments, saying things like, I've never felt this way before, you make me so happy, so and so in the past never treated me the way, or I never felt the way I feel with you. They know exactly what to say to get the person just totally smitten. And they also might do things early on, like profess their love, or take them on trips, like expensive trips to places that you wouldn't normally do that so early on. So that's a red flag. And they also like to move quickly. They want to move
Mm.
in quickly. They want to meet your family quickly. They want you to meet their family quickly, because they want to impress you with how well they treat your family, and how they want you to see how well they treat their family, especially if it's a male. They
Mm.
want you to see how they treat their mother, because the women really go for that. They really love to see a man who treats his mother well, right? I mean, I fell for the same, you know.
Sure. It is important how men treat their mothers, but that's not the most important thing, right?
Right, exactly.
And how does that
Yeah.
adjust then in a long term relationship? I've been married 26 years. I'm not accusing my husband of anything. Uh, but
Yeah.
it's always curious of how does it evolve with a longer term relationship?
Well, typically, and this isn't all inclusive, but typically what I see when working with clients and from my own experience is that love bombing honeymoon phase wears off very quickly. Once they've gotten what the goal for them is, once they've moved in with you, once they have gotten married. I've heard stories of um, where they reported that their husband changed into a different man on the honeymoon, you know.
Mm.
Once you've had a baby, once they've reached their goal, then they stop doing all that charming love bombing stuff, and they
Mm-hmm.
go to their true self. Their true colors start to come out. And
Mm.
that's one of the telltale signs is you're just kind of left confused. When that happens, you're just kind of left confused. Like, where is this person this charming person that I fell in love with? Like, this is a totally different person. And I remember experiencing that with the one I shared about earlier when we moved in together on moving day. We weren't even done unpacking our things, and he changed into a completely different person. And I was left thinking, what have I just done? You know?
Wow.
So you are just left very confused, because it's a very dramatic shift. Usually, sometimes it's very subtle,
Okay.
and it's hard to spot very subtle changes. And sometimes it's very black and white, night and day change.
Okay. Wow.
And right. And you start seeing more self-seeking, self-centered behaviors, less attentive, less less charming, just the nice part of them starts to go away and turn into something very different. And that's usually what you'll see in long-term relationships. You will also see things like very controlling behaviors, very jealous, possessive, for example, accusing of cheating, or just not liking the fact that their partner is spending time with other people, even if it's with family members. They don't like it when their partner shows other things or other people attention that they want for themselves. So
Wow.
that's another big shift.
Well, I
that you
appreciate
see.
you kind of giving those clear and specific and how it can look different in the beginning and later on. As we kind of shift in just a little bit into, we've talked a little bit about narcissism, but how an unhealthy relationship can mean different things to different people. We talk about, like, we get ideas of, oh, to me, this word means this, or an unhealthy relationship means this, or trauma, little t and big T, can mean different things to different people. So can we talk just a little bit about that?
Yes. Yeah. And when you mention little t and big T, yeah, exactly. A lot of people, when they think of trauma, they think of big T things like combat, like, going to war, or being sexually assaulted, or being mugged. And those things definitely do, count as trauma, big T, as we call them in the mental health field. But the little T's, and I'm not sure how I feel about the little and the big, because to me they're all, they're all traumas, and but that's how it was. In fact, I don't know who first coined those terms, but that's how we do refer to it in the mental health field. And so little T's or traumas are more referred to as like attachment wounds. So things like breakups, things like being betrayed by a loved one,
Well, and I want to make sure that we're not minimizing someone's trauma. And
Right.
when healthcare professionals make a distinguishment, I think for me, what the big T means is anybody would recognize and identify this as a traumatic experience and event. And the little t meaning not less severe, because sometimes chronic little t traumas can have a far greater impact, or just as a great impact on someone's mental health and relationship and attachment issues. So I just want to make sure that we're not defining them. It's just what's clearly represented in society as trauma, and what is more subtle and more difficult to define. Like when you see a capital T somewhere, it's very clear that is a letter T. When you see a lowercase t, sometimes people think, is that a plus sign? Is it this? What does that really mean? So is that a better way maybe to
Oh,
distinguish?
no, that was perfect. That was absolutely a wonderful description of big and little T's. Absolutely.
Well, thank you. I'm glad I've studied some trauma so we could have an informed discussion. Because I think unhealthy relationships can pervasively either be big T, that's clear sexual, emotional, financial, physical abuse, and then there's the little t, that's the unhealthy, long term, wears you down, destroys your confidence, your identity, self concept. Is there anything you feel like you'd like to add to that distinguishment?
Well, when we're talking about abuse, and this kind of comes along the same lines of big and little T, when people hear about abuse, they tend to put the physical traumas in the big T category and the emotional or psychological in the little T. And I work with clients who have told me I would have rather been hit than called names or lied to or manipulated. Like I would have rather it been physical than emotional. So it depends on who you ask, really, and what their perception is.
Very good point. For listeners, I am nodding my head vehemently, and yes, because physical abuse oftentimes is more visible, and the emotional wounds are
Mhm.
harder to identify and sometimes to explain. So I'm glad you did say that.
Yeah.
A definition you wrote for me of a
Mhm.
relationship is unhealthy or toxic when there is harm of any kind, is
Yes.
chronic, with no plans to change or do recovery work.
Hmm.
I thought that was, quote, thank
Right.
you, Leah Petrucci, on that,
Yes.
because that is little t seeping
Yeah.
into or exploding into big T. Because in a
Right.
relationship, when the partner is not willing to do the work, is unwilling,
Yeah.
unable to change, no
Yeah.
change will indeed happen. Wow. Whew.
Yes. Right. Right. Because I mean, everyone makes mistakes. Whether it was intentional or not intentional, everyone makes mistakes. Everyone causes harm to other
Mm,
people, whether we meant to or not. I think the difference is our willingness to acknowledge it and
mm,
change. And that's what you typically don't see with narcissism, typically. Um, and that's
really
why
good.
the percentage rate is so low of people who actually receive the formal diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder
Sure.
or NPD, because they don't come in to therapy and admit, I have all these behaviors and characteristics. I'm the problem. I need to get the help, and it's causing me distress, and it's causing problems in my life, in my relationships, in my job. That's typically, you don't see that unless they come in for something else like couples counseling and say, but you have to fix my wife or my
Mm.
child. you know
Yes,
that
and I'm
doesn't.
laughing
Yeah.
not out of any disrespect at all, but yes, a narcissist walks into a therapist's office, right? I mean, that sounds like a setup for a
Sounds like a
joke,
joke.
right? Because if I was a narcissist, I would think clearly the problem is not with me. I think a
Yeah.
great example that I think of is from The Princess Bride. One of the characters, the Sicilian character,
Oh,
uh,
yes.
and I think he thought, clearly, I will not choose the wine in front of me. And
Yes.
he's thinking that he's smarter than everyone. And yeah,
Uh-huh.
maybe not the
Yes.
best example in a relationship way, but.
We gotta love Princess Bride, though.
Well, just to give a little bit of a lighter moment before we started recording, I told Leah, I said, well, I just need to take a deep breath for a moment. And she reached for her essential oils. And I wanted to give this gift to the listeners, and if they end up getting to see this on YouTube. And so, Leah, could you talk us through what you did? And I will do it
Yeah.
with you because I
Yeah.
was just blown away. I'll even take off my glasses for this one.
Yes. So I can't take credit for this, so I'll give credit to where it's due. I am doing some applied neurology work through a membership called Brain Based Wellness. And I've been learning how to do vagus nerve to calm down cranial nerves, vagus nerve 10, cranial nerve 10 being one of them. But there's 12 cranial nerves that I practice calming down or resetting on a weekly basis. And this one that I taught you is resetting cranial nerve 1, which is our olfactory nerve.
Okay.
And so what I did and what we'll do right now is I'm taking a bottle of my favorite peppermint doTERRA essential oil,
Okay.
and I put my finger over one nostril and I hold the bottle under the other. And as I inhale, I just gently tap up and down that nostril and then exhale. And that just kind of just relaxes you, gets and you inhale that wonderful peppermint scent. I do
Wow.
this in between client sessions, um, as it's very calming and also just gives me a little. It's calming, but also gives me a little bit of pep, if that
Uh,
makes sense. It's peppermint. Hello.
Peppermint, I usually think of peppermint as energizing, but if you're
Yeah.
taking it directly into the first cranial nerve, which is because
Mm-hmm.
it's the first one that comes out as we're being created in our wombs, in our mother's wombs, And I love that. I just thought that was a quick practical tip. So you
Yeah.
closed off your left nostril, you held
Hmm.
it. Oh, no. Or did you do it off of your right? Was it your left
Well,
nostril?
you do both, so it doesn't matter
Okay.
which one you start with. You plug one nostril, hold it under the unplugged nostril as you breathe in, and then tap up and down that nostril that
Okay.
you're breathing in.
Wow.
And then
Wow.
you switch and do the other side.
Well, it
Yeah.
was a very effective tool to bring down calming, or sometimes when we have connection issues, or I can't find the right link, or I sent the wrong link, all these
Yeah.
reality things that happen to us. And it
Yes.
just brings us into this calming state. So I'll have you back and we can maybe talk about some polyvagal theory and some of those
Absolutely.
strategies. That would be amazing.
Yes. Absolutely. Definitely
Wow.
polyvagal theory is the piece in my practice that I found to be missing in the last several years. And so I started adding that back or adding that in with my clients and teaching them some easy vagus nerve reset exercises.
Absolutely. There is some information that is so helpful, practical, and for us, those of us that are transitioning into the middle of our lives, and I just want to define midlife for people. Some people think it's the saying it's the end of something. And I would say for oftentimes it's people who are in the middle of, if they've had children, then they still are in that kind of sandwich generation or the Oreo cookie, and you maybe have your parents, some still have grandparents.
Yeah.
And how do you juggle all those things? So in the great middle, we have a change in our estrogen. And when our estrogen goes down, our cortisol, stress hormones,
Mhm.
naturally go up. So taking time to breathe, de stress, relax, all of those things
Yes.
that we need, it's so important.
So important. So important.
Well, I'm going to transition us to the kind of final topic. And
Okay.
you talked a little bit, just to review, you wove in your story of discovering not only did you have a heart to help people who were ready to get out of narcissistic relationships, but that
Mhm.
you yourself had identified that you were in one. And this really created this kind of career pivot for you. And
Mhm.
we were able to really define what kind of makes an early relationship sign of a narcissistic person. And I know you've got your handout that will include, but then you
Mhm.
also gave us a longer term viewpoint of here's some red flags you might notice later in the relationship. And I think you also kind of wove in the reason that you made that career pivot is because when you kept watching people go back to their unhealthy relationships,
Yeah.
that was so difficult but motivating
Yes.
for you.
Yes.
So I just want to end on your top three strategies or approaches for helping people progress through the recovery process.
Mhm. Yes, and I think if I remember correctly, I put education as number one because knowledge is power. So you have to know, to understand what is narcissism. So narcissism 101. You also have to understand what codependency is, and
Mm,
what trauma is and what complex trauma looks like. Because a lot of people that I work with, when I present to them that they may be dealing with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, are a bit confused at first until I explain to them first of all, what is trauma? And second of all, what is complex trauma, which simply means that it's chronic. They went through that over and over and over again. It wasn't just one occurrence, it was many. So that is first and foremost is education. Um, the second one that I put was it self-love, helping them.
yes.
Yes, helping them rediscover themselves, and that was probably what was missing in the first place,
Yes.
of
Yes.
of the relationship was that self-love. And because once people realize that they are with an unhealthy person or with a narcissistic person, typically a healthy person would say, okay, this isn't the right match for me. I need to go. I need to end this. But those of us, and I'll say us because I've been there, those of us who are codependent, who don't put our health first, don't put our mental health and well-being first, or at least that was my case. I definitely have done a lot of work to make myself priority, and not in a selfish way, not in a narcissistic way.
That's right.
That's a huge difference that I'll sometimes get people say, but isn't that selfish? No,
No.
self-care is not selfish.
Let's say that again.
Yes,
Self-care is not
not
selfish.
selfish.
Women need to hear that around the
Yes,
world for sure.
absolutely. And if people have never known what that feels like or known what that involves, what does self-care look like? What does self-love look like? That is what I'm there for as a therapist and as a coach, is to coach them into learning to love themselves, maybe for the first time ever.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
sometimes they're learning to love themselves again because they lost sight of
Mm.
loving themselves, but sometimes they've never known what that is. They don't know what that is. They don't know what it looks like. They don't know what it feels like. They don't know what they like. When I ask the question of what do you like to do, and they say, I don't know. That's the work. Let's find out. Let's
It's
find out what
so
you like.
good.
Yeah.
You are lighting me up. My facial expression is so animated because I went through that healing process and
Yes.
journey of identifying what do I like. And one of my exercises was looking myself in the mirror and saying, I love you.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't get the words out. And I
Yeah.
thought, oh, that should be a red flag. If you cannot look at yourself in the mirror and say sincerely, wow, you are so worth this time and attention, right?
Yes.
Oh, and I
Yeah.
think,
It's
sorry,
huge.
I think I probably distracted you. The first one was education, knowing what is narcissism, codependency, holistic
Mm-hmm.
health and wellness. Number two,
Yes. Okay.
building or discovering for the first time or rebuilding self love, self esteem, which is not selfish. And the final one.
Well, let's see. I think I had a hard time choosing three. So I think I put four. Was it connection with others, or was it
Yes,
coping skills?
healthy social connection with
Okay.
others.
Yes.
Great job.
Yes. Healthy. Yeah. And I'm not really talking here about healthy romantic relationships. Like, yes, it is absolutely important that if the person I'm working with is interested in having a healthy relationship in the future, that we work on that. But first, we do the love of self work first and foremost. But even before we go into working on what does it look like to choose a healthy partner, we practice healthy social connection with others. We practice friendships, of healthy social connection with people of the same gender, for example. Women getting practice having good, healthy social friendships with other women, for example,
I love
which
that.
is one of the reasons, and I'm sure we'll get to that, but one of the reasons I wanted to create the membership that I'm working on is to give the women a place to practice just that healthy social connection. And chances are, if they were in a narcissistic relationship or a controlling relationship, they didn't have the opportunity to practice healthy social friendships, or weren't allowed to, or were made to feel guilty for spending time with their women friends, or whoever, family even.
Sure.
And so that's so important, and also to combat the loneliness, because that's reported a lot after a breakup. I'm missing the person's good qualities, and just missing that partnership. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to get into another romantic relationship to feel that connection. We can
Right.
get that connection in good, solid, healthy friendships.
I love it. You have so much wisdom to offer, and I already have a list of questions for the next time we talk. But for today, Leah Petrucci, I know we're going to include in the show notes where people can find you. You are a holistic health and wellness coach. You are experienced in helping people recover from narcissistic relationships, and you are a licensed medical healthcare
Mental health.
counselor.
Mental health.
Mental health
Yes.
counselor. Oh,
Maybe
thank you.
someday medical. Who knows?
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Any final words?
Um, just, I just want to thank everybody for listening. And, if anyone is interested in learning more about what we've been talking about, I'm sure you'll include all of the ways that they can access any of my work in the show notes. My YouTube channel is a place to learn some of those things we talked about, and that is called Holistic Healing Network. It's very up and coming. I just got that started, and would love it if people would tune in and subscribe. And actually, I recently filmed an entire series about the frequently asked questions that I get about narcissism. And
Fantastic.
I filmed those like in one day. I filmed a bunch of videos in about 5 hours, and I'm working on editing them and releasing them one at a time. So
Well,
I'm
great. Well, that's what we'll
working
include
on
as a
that now.
call to action. Go and subscribe to the Holistic Healing Network on
Yes, I love it.
YouTube, and you will learn so much. Thank you so much,
I
Leah.
love it. Thank you so much for having me.